The Crossed have plagued the Earth since the sea virus broke out. Every major town on the Earth has been decimated to the ground. Filth lines the streets, and if you're lucky, you get to stay out of sight, because the Crossed are repulsive infected people that will kill, dismember, cannibalize, and violate anything in sight. And everybody fears them, because they aren't like zombies. They are smarter, they retain their skills, and what's worse is that they know how to use what you love against you. But in these dark times, humans can somehow still prove themselves to be the worst creature on the planet. Amidst the rush for survival, this is the dark truth our band of survivors is about to learn the hard way. Oh, and for the prequel Crossed stories, check the links in description. Now, let's begin. Crossed Psychopath number 1, the rescue that triggers it all. A group of Crossed are violating and killing a vulture and a deer, and this entire scene is being watched by our group of survivors, which consists of 4 members: Amanda, Rick, Claire, and Darwin. They watch on in disgust through their binoculars because they have no other choice. They need to keep a track of these Crossed, otherwise they could get ambushed any time. Rick is their leader, and Claire is his sweetheart. Amanda and Darwin used to be a thing during their college days, but right now their relationship is rocky to say the least. It has been a few months since they have been surviving on their own, and Rick has learned that whenever the Crossed violate and kill, it is good for them. It takes the hunger out of the Crossed, which will soon send them into a stupor, which they can use to their advantage. The massacre in front of them finally comes to a conclusion when the Crossed rip off of the head from the vulture and the deer. They then proceed to eat and violate the remains, but this isn't enough for one of them. He attacks the weaker member of the group, and this sends them all into a frenzy. The 3 of them violate the weaker one, but he, in retaliation, rips off one of the Crossed's manhood. Soon, the group of the 4 Crossed becomes a group of the 2, as they all start fighting, and 2 of them end up succumbing to their injuries. Once this is done, the group knows it is safe to travel again, and as they began to travel, we see that Darwin and Amanda slept together last night, but this was a one-time thing for Amanda. Even the world ending hasn't changed the reason they broke up back in school. The next page shows us a group of the Crossed violating a naked woman using a garden tool. Even though infected, the salesman that sells this tool hasn't forgotten his sales pitch. With a wide smile on his face, he makes his sales pitch and then proceeds to do the unthinkable. And once this happens, Harold Laurie wakes up, screaming Laurie's name. Although far away, this faint scream is heard by Amanda, who ends up finding Harold in a crevasse. The group ends up rescuing Harold. Despite Darwin's initial apprehensions, there is no cross on his face, which means that he hasn't been infected. Once Harold has been pulled out, his broken leg is fixed by Darwin. Darwin and Amanda both are medical students. Darwin tries to ask some basic questions to Harold, but he is simply too weak to speak. As Amanda takes care of him, Rick, Darwin, and Claire break off from the group to discuss this new inductee. The 2 boys don't want to take the burden of carrying the man on their backs, but before they can even discuss this matter, they are ambushed by Amanda, who has been hearing everything. She implores them to see that if they end up acting like the Crossed and don't help other humans, they are no better than them. That is when Harold intervenes the conversation and tells them that he can sweeten the deal by bringing something useful to the table. Harold had been trapped in there for 6 days, and he had almost lost his voice. He can barely speak as he tells them his story, but unbeknownst to the entire group, Harold isn't the man they think he is. He is our protagonist, the titular psychopath. Hey guys, before I continue, if you like the video, please consider hitting the like and subscribe buttons. These 2 clicks from you will help us tremendously to continue bringing you these marvelous long reads. And now, let's continue. So, because he has the entire group roped into his surface story, his psychotic brain is already working behind the curtains to come up with a plan that not only ensures a survival, but also ensures that he thrives. He has already established the group's hierarchy. He knows Rick is the leader. He deduces that Rick was likely a plumber or a football player before the virus broke out. He then notices Claire and classifies her as a needy woman that would do anything for her survival. She used to be a park ranger, which is why she is qualified to find them food in the wild. Darwin is the muscle of the group, and he doesn't like Harold, and Harold already knows it. Then there is Amanda, someone Harold genuinely likes. He thinks she is a pure soul. Unlike the story that he's going to tell them, Harold has survived in the wild on his own for 3 years. In these 3 years, he has trained his ears to hear every small noise that could aid his survival, and now that half an hour has passed, Harold is able to speak clearly, and so he spins his web for the group. He tells them that he is headed to the mission. They scour the country, like bounty hunters looking for doctors, techs, scientists, anyone that can help their cause. They had 2 scientists with them from Utah that they were bringing back to the mission. And this intriguing story of hope is enough for the group to listen to Harold intently. But ever since Harold laid his eyes on Claire's lips, he hasn't been able to think straight. It's part of the reason why he has classified her as the group whore. And even while telling this story, he isn't able to take his eyes off of them. Not only that, he begins to daydream what he is going to do if he ever manages to sleep with Claire. But the story seems too good to be true to Amanda, and so she asks where the mission is located. Harold had prepared for this question. He tells them that the entire group of Marines was quite secretive about their location, but one day he heard one of them say New Jersey, and that is when Darwin expresses his disdain for Harold. Everyone knows that all major cities have been ransacked by Crossed. How could the mission survive in such a densely populated place like New Jersey? Harold simply chalks it up to the military having its ways to keep things secret, and then Rick asks him why he isn't with them right now. And this is when Harold spins yet another web. He tells him that the entire group was ambushed by the Crossed, which is why he ran away from them. He hid in a building for a few days and then decided to follow the group. But he was too excited to join a cause like them, and he stupidly ended up breaking his own rule. He came out of hiding too early, and which resulted in him getting caught by the Crossed. In his haste to escape them, Harold ended up falling down into the crevice 6 days ago. Even though this is a great prospect for them all, Rick somehow gets the feeling that this is too good to be true. He tells Harold that they need some time to discuss this matter, but that is when Harold comes up with another way to persuade them. After all, he needs to give them something concrete, something they can rely on and trust. And so he tells them about his trained ears, that he can hear the Crossed coming from miles away, and he tells them that right now they're about to be ambushed by the Crossed. The 4 of them look down from the cliff and wait. And sure enough, minutes later, a group of the Crossed comes into view. The entire group digests what has just happened, that if Harold can hear the Crossed coming from miles away, then he is likely telling the truth about the mission. And while they are busy doing this in their own heads, Harold is coming up with a plan of his own. At first, Harold's only rule was to live alone and die together, but something has changed in the past few months. For some reason, he has a mission of his own, and to accomplish that mission, he is going to need the group's help. But he is going to have to establish his own hierarchy, and that surely doesn't involve Darwin in it. Darwin is against Harold, and Harold knows this. Harold finds him unstable and violent, which could get them all killed. He likes Rick. Rick is a hard-working man, someone he would have hired if his store was still standing. And well, when it comes to Claire, Harold can't help but think about her lips. Every time he looks at them, he imagines different ways of violating her. The worst part is that Harold already knows that he is attracted to them so much that he might end up endangering his own mission, and this, in his psychotic brain, is another flaw that needs to be taken care of. Not a flaw in him, but a flaw in Claire. However, his plan has worked. The group has accepted him, and the next morning, they reveal the news to him. Harold pretends to shed a tear or two. He's playing the role of a feeble and frail man that won't survive on his own in the wild. Everybody is buying it. He has already earned the sympathies of Claire and Amanda. However, Claire gets an uneasy feeling when she welcomes Harold to the group, because Harold creepily looks at her and tells her that she has a nice smile out of the blue. The group creates a makeshift rig to carry Harold on their backs, and then sets off into the wild, relying solely on Harold's ears and tracking abilities. Crossed Psychopath number 2, Easy Never Does It. The next page takes us into Harold's past. He used to own a kids' store, a party store to be precise here. He would sell knickknacks like kids' toys, party supplies, gift bundles, balloons, and more. But even before the virus had broken out, Harold had always been a psychopath and a perv, because his real reason for opening the store was the kids' mums. He would always perv on them, but he had a certain fixation on one woman named Laurie. She would visit his store often, and Harold remembers that every time he would look at her, he would start sweating. This is the Laurie he was talking about, dreaming about when he suddenly woke up and was found by the group. Right now, the group is making their way through an abandoned town, and Harold is busy annoying Darwin by telling him about how women smell. To Darwin's surprise, Amanda is interested in Harold's stories. Not only Amanda, but Claire as well. Rick asks them to keep their voices down because the Crossed could be nearby, but that is when Harold assures him that they are all safe. Darwin turns to Harold and says, "How do you know that? Because you're psychic." But that is when Harold points to a pile of shit behind the car and tells them that this is their clue. The feces have been left over by the crossed, and surprisingly, they don't smell. Harold tells them that this means that the feces has been here for a few weeks. Harold can figure this out by the weather, which has been humid, contrary to the condition of the feces. The group believes him and they walk away, impressed by Harold's tracking abilities. Again, Harold has gotten away with his tricks. He tells us that he likes Rick. Harold could use a man like him, but he fears how Rick will react once he realizes that Harold has been lying since the start. Harold then reveals his true plan. He is, in fact, tracking the group of the crossed that killed Laurie. He wants his revenge, and Harold is going to get it one way or the other. We then get another glimpse into Harold's past, the night he spent with Laurie, the night she was in a catatonic state, and Harold had created a shrine around her. Harold was and is a sick, twisted individual. He had had his way with Laurie while she was subdued by him. Harold calls this his perfect love and paints it as though he and Laurie had the best romantic relationship there ever was. But reality is far from truth, and Harold's dissociation from reality is another glimpse into his psychopathic tendencies. Because the feces that he pretended were from the crossed that were in this region are in fact from the group of the crossed that he has been tracking, the group that killed Laurie. He lied about its condition. The weather, in fact, has been dry, which means that the group is only 4 or 5 days ahead of them, and this doesn't give Harold much time to work through the group of survivors that he is currently with. Work through simply means getting rid of the ones he doesn't like, while keeping those that serve his purpose. The group decides to spend the night in an abandoned house on the outskirts of the city. The group finds some canned food in the house, and as they sit down to eat, the girls demand a dirty story from Harold. Harold knows that this is his chance to humanize himself in front of the group, and so he concocts a story where he had to fill in for his clown because he had broken his leg. Harold was exhausted after the party was over, and he decided to get some alone time in the washroom, but that is when one of the kids' mothers had followed him inside because she had always fantasized about sleeping with a clown. As the mother removed her top, Harold was too frozen in his place to do anything, and so, according to the story, the mother ended up honking his clown nose, and Harold simply ended up passing out. Everybody in the group laughs their hearts out at this story, and Harold knows that he has succeeded in humanizing himself in front of them. In actuality, this story never happened, and because he had gotten such a good response, Harold decided to press his luck. He asked Darwin to leave him on the porch of the house so that he could contemplate and have some alone time. In reality, he was simply looking to mope around and earn some sympathy. And he earns some sympathy because Amanda is clearly looking at him from the window as Harold pretends to cry. Darwin then approaches Amanda from behind and in a crude way invites her into his bed that night. Amanda says that he should ask her again later and then proceeds to go and have a talk with Harold outside. Harold mopes and cries about Laurie and tells Amanda about it. He tells the story vaguely, leaving out the precise details to ensure that he earns as much sympathy as possible. Harold knows he has hit it out of the ballpark when Claire comes and joins them. However, this action on Claire's part only cementifies what Harold thinks about her, and Harold knows that he needs to get rid of her first. He then tells them his past and leaves out the pervy details. He tells them that he used to be a divorced dad who owned a party store, and he was sweet on a girl named Laurie, but she was married. When the virus first broke out, Harold checked up on his children and ex-wife. However, by the time he got there, they all had been infected. His ex-wife's new boyfriend and his children were cannibalizing her body when he got there. Harold ran them all over with his van. As he says in the present day, "I dragged my daughter down the street 2 miles before the pavement finally tore her head off." This would earn anybody sympathies, let alone Amanda and Claire, who reassure Harold that that thing wasn't his daughter anymore. He then tells them that the next thing he did was to go and check up on Laurie, and thankfully she hadn't been infected. Harold managed to rescue her and terms, the two of them coming together as fate. Harold has begun to cry in the present day, and maybe somewhere deep down in him, he does feel sorry for Laurie in his own sadistic way. We then see Harold and Laurie survive for a few weeks together. Harold paints the picture as though he and Laurie were having the time of their lives while being together. But in reality, the image Harold paints is far from the truth. Every moment Laurie spent with him, she had a look of disassociation, shock, and horror on her face. Her eyes were always wide open because she knew what was coming for her. Whether it was Harold or the Crossed, she knew it was only a matter of time. Once he is done with his story, angry, Claire hugs Harold to reassure him, but all Harold can think about are her breasts. He imagines what he is going to do once he can have his way with Claire, and the next panel of the comic shows us the true Harold once he is unleashed. That night, because of his super hearing, Harold could hear Claire and Rick having sex, but he also hears something else, a dog crying out in pain somewhere far away. Over the years, Harold has come to know these screams, these deafening cries, canine howls that can only be caused by the Crossed. Harold knows that the Crossed have come to the town, and he's going to lead the group into it to carry out his plan. The next morning, he convinces the group to go through the town contrary to his first rule of staying away from crowded places. He shows them empty shell cases on the ground and claims them to be the remnants of the group of Marines. In reality, they have just been left over from the fight that must have happened when the virus broke out. But neither Rick nor Darwin look around and notice that the entire place is littered with empty shell casings, and so they believe Harold and head into town. Crossed Psychopath number 3, Calculated Disposal. Darwin did a good job when setting Harold's leg. The leg has begun to heal, but not fast enough for Harold to carry out his plan. He is going to have to do something in this town itself, and Harold had already planned ahead. Once everyone had slept, and Amanda and Claire had left him on the porch outside, Harold had crawled over to the entrance of the house and left a used bean can for the Crossed to find and track them. While passing through the town, Harold begins to enact his plan by claiming that he has a bad stomach and that he needs to go to the toilet right now. He keeps on insisting until the group has no choice but to let him relieve himself. They all wait outside an abandoned store while Harold does his thing on the inside. But Harold is simply sitting there because the whole point of this exercise is to waste as much time as possible. Darwin keeps on hounding Harold to hurry it up, and the two of them have a heated argument. However, Harold is soon distracted by an intact jelly bean that he finds inside the store, which reminds him of Laurie again. As he is lost in his memories, we see Amanda walk into the store and sympathize with Harold. She knows how tough a bad stomach can be, but that is when Harold decides to give up the act and says that he is done. He crawls out from behind the counter and then offers the intact jelly bean to Amanda. She finds the gesture quite sweet, but in Harold's psychopathic mind, this is his way of showing his love to her, proposing to her, and because she accepts the jelly bean, in Harold's mind, she accepts his love. Harold has managed to waste a good 25 minutes in the store. As the group continues to walk through the town, Harold can hear the Crossed behind them, but they aren't close enough to ambush them. Harold needs to do something else, and he gets the perfect opportunity when he spots a pharmaceutical store nearby. This is the perfect chance to split up the group. He asks Amanda and Rick to go to the pharmacy store so that they can get him some medicines and gather other medical supplies, which could be vital for their survival. When Darwin says that he should be the one going with Amanda, Harold says that it would be a waste of time to put him down and for Rick to pick him back up again. Reluctantly, the group agrees, and they split off. And that is when Harold takes his chance and informs Darwin and Claire that the Crossed are coming. The group has prepared strategies for such situations. The idea is to not get spotted by the Crossed, because if you are spotted, they won't stop looking until you are found. And so Amanda and Rick hunker down in the pharmacy, while Harold, Claire and Darwin hunker down in a nearby clothes store. They head into the basement while the Crossed wreak havoc above. Thankfully, none of them were spotted, and now Harold can carry out his plan. Claire watches the horror unfolding outside from the basement window, and Harold uses this opportunity to separate Darwin from her under the pretext of his bad stomach. He asks Darwin to put him down on the stairs while telling him a gruesome story about a Crossed violating a frog. He then says something that takes Darwin by surprise. "You know they could be raping Amanda right now." Darwin turns around in surprise, only for Harold to gag him using a cloth and then stab him in the throat using a broken bottle. In the last moments of Darwin's life, Harold tortures him again by saying that Amanda had sex with him. This was a lie, but Harold simply wanted to hurt Darwin. Once he is done, he turns his eyes towards Claire, and we all know what's coming for her, a psychopath. He asks Claire for a kiss under the pretext that it has been so long since he slept with someone. Claire tries to be nice and says that she is with Rick, and that is when Harold lunges at her. He gags her throat with the same cloth he used on Darwin and then threatens her with the same broken bottle. He offers her a deal. It's either going to be the crossed outside or him, and Claire reluctantly gives in. Harold has his way with her, and once done, he forces her to accept that she is a whore. Claire reveals that her issues stem from her being raped at a young age, but Harold has no sympathy or empathy for her. He hits her in the head with the broken bottle again, in a fit of rage, which causes her to pass out. When Claire comes to her senses again, she realizes that she has been gagged and restrained by Harold. He violated her twice while she was passed out, and is going to have his way with her again, but this time he has a surprise planned for her. He's going to violate her while wearing Darwin's face. He then pulls out Darwin's skin that he sliced off of his face. Claire panics and ends up kicking Harold in the nuts. She continues to struggle, and this time refuses to give in to his demands. And so something takes over Harold, and he picks up a nearby tile and smashes Claire's face again and again. This moment of sudden rage makes Harold realize and come to terms with his psychopathy. He has never felt this good before. What he felt while killing Claire is what he has been chasing all his life. He felt superhuman while carrying out this deed, and for his next act of depravity, Harold cuts off Claire's lips and violates them. Once he is done, he wears them on his crotch. Crossed Psychopath number 4, Nobody Suspects a Thing. Amanda and Rick have discovered what happened to Darwin and Claire. Amanda comes out of the store crying and inconsolable. Harold had hoped that she wouldn't go inside and find out what was waiting for her, but she did anyway. You see, after Harold had carried out his plan, he had staged the crime scene. Harold had noticed that the group of the crossed above liked to wear faces of all the dead people, and so he had started calling them skin faces. This made it easier for Harold to hide his crimes. He tore off Darwin and Claire's faces to make it look like the crossed had done it. He then smashed in the basement window, picked up all the glass pieces from the outside and threw them in to make it look like that the window was broken from the outside. And because Darwin hadn't suffered enough, he had torn off his manhood and shoved it down Darwin's throat. Harold had then found a plausible place to hide between a bunch of wires and had waited for Rick to find him. His plan had worked perfectly. Amanda and Rick both bought his story. Although Amanda was unconsolable, Harold implored them to push on because the skin faces were still nearby. Although they had been useful to him, they were still the crossed, and he didn't want them to get ambushed by them. The group continued to work their way out of town as Harold remembered the night he had violated Laurie. In his mind, they were making love, but Laurie was simply lying there and accepting her fate. Once they were done, Harold had proposed to her by giving her a diamond ring, but all that did was intensify Laurie's emotions, and she began to cry again. This was the only deal breaker for Harold, and he had ended up slapping Laurie for crying. When she did not stop, Harold slapped her again and broke out into a fit of rage. His psychopathic mind believed that this was the least Laurie could do for him. After all, he did for her. He had been protecting her, giving her food, and staying up all night while keeping a lookout. He had then stormed out of the house. Not only that, Harold had taken both the backpacks with him. He wanted to teach Laurie a lesson that she couldn't survive without him, and he was right. She couldn't, because when Harold got back, he found Laurie already turned into the crossed getting violated by them. By now, Harold has led Amanda and Rick to a farmhouse. There are no crossed nearby, and thankfully for them, the farmhouse is well stocked. It even has electricity and movies, and so the three of them ended up spending a week there relaxing, and for once, forgetting what was going on in the outside world. Harold knew that this was temporary and that emotions would break out soon, but he did not expect them to be so intense. Because on the 7th day, out of nowhere, Amanda broke into tears out of the blue while watching a movie. Even Rick ended up breaking into tears once he remembered what had happened to Darwin and Claire. Both Rick and Amanda finally ended up confessing that they loved Darwin and Claire, and the two of them ended up consoling each other. Harold tried to get his fair share of attention by apologizing for not being able to help them and save them because he never had a weapon. Amanda ended up consoling him and saying that it wasn't his fault, and during this, she touched him. All Harold could focus on after this point was the fact that Amanda touched him, but all hell broke loose that night when Harold was keeping watch, because he ended up hearing Amanda and Rick having sex. He did not want to believe his ears, but when he looked through the bedroom keyhole, all his suspicions were confirmed. Harold began to panic. His brain began to scramble for ways to justify what was happening. At first, he thought Amanda was just another whore like Claire, but then he began to fixate on Rick, and soon his brain brain started to make Harold believe that Rick was taking advantage of Amanda. He was a rapist, and once Harold's brain had classified Rick as a rapist, there was no stopping him from getting revenge. Harold wanted to barge into the bedroom and shoot Rick in the head, but he knew that he would need a better plan. He needed to make Rick pay for what he did to Amanda, and so Harold started plotting his revenge from the very next day. Harold pushed them all to the brink of exhaustion for the next few days. He never let them rest enough or stay in a place cozy enough so that Rick and Amanda could sleep together again. And then his haste finally came to fruition when they ended up finding a fresh crossed body covered from head to toe in blood. This was the group of the crossed that Harold had been hunting since Laurie was turned. He called this group the Bloodskins because they liked to cover themselves in the blood of their victims. He and Laurie had come across them back in their hometown. They had watched the crossed stuff their victims into a wood chipper and then bathe in their blood. He then paints another sob story by telling them that this group of the crossed killed and raped Laurie. As Rick and Amanda try to console Harold, he ends up convincing them that they need to kill them both. They need to kill both the groups of the crossed to exact their revenge, and Harold knows exactly how to do that. "I want revenge too, Harold. How do we do it?" When Rick says this, Harold imagines all the ways he is going to exact revenge on Rick. He imagines stabbing a knife directly through the back of Rick's neck. Crossed Psychopath number 5, the war cry. They continue moving into the town until they finally stumble upon the Bloodskins. The group is sitting in the middle of a basketball court around a fire. The fire is built from the bodies of their latest victims. While the three of them keep a close eye on the crossed, all Harold can focus on is Laurie's backpack that is being held onto by one of the crossed. That night, the three of them camp in a suburban house outside of the town, and that is when Harold reveals his plan to them. He plans to make the Bloodskins and the Skin Faces fight each other, and they're going to do this by disguising themselves as the crossed. But they will need another thing for the plan: a working car. It doesn't take long for them to find a working pickup truck. Whenever Rick gets happy, Harold can feel his blood boil. He tells us that if it wasn't for Claire's lips around his crotch, he would have shot Rick in the head a long time ago. He tells us that it is as though Claire is keeping him steady from beyond the grave to exact revenge on Rick. The next day, they disguise themselves as the crossed, and it seems to be working because a group of the crossed that they encounter on their way while driving into the town where Claire and Darwin were killed by him don't chase after them. Harold has given a major part of the responsibility to Amanda, and he has done so because he wants to be alone with Rick. Harold is quite sure that the Skin Faces will not have moved on because he had left traces of his presence there. Once the crossed knew that there was a human around, they wouldn't stop until the human was found. And when they get to the town square, that is exactly what has happened. The Skin Faces have managed to stumble upon a dad and daughter duo, and currently they are busy skinning the face of the dad while the daughter watches from the rooftop. They are about to ambush the daughter, and this is when Amanda decides that she has had enough. Neither Harold nor Rick stop her from shooting the daughter before the crossed get to her. All three of them act like the crossed and hurl abuses at them. This gets the Skin Faces' attention, and they begin to chase after the car. Amanda throws a dog's body out of the car, and this blood trail will allow the Skin Faces to reach their final destination. Once they get to the town where the Bloodskins are holed up, they carry out the final part of their plan. Amanda is going to stake out the place from an abandoned house, while Harold and Rick wait in the car around the block to create a distraction in case something goes wrong. Amanda is supposed to trigger a confrontation between the two groups by shooting one of them, and so they wait. They wait for a few hours until the Skin Faces finally show up in the town. The confrontation between the two groups is at a standstill until Amanda shoots one of their leaders directly in the throat. She then screams from the rooftop, maniacally pretending to be one of them, and this triggers the war between the two groups. As the Skin Faces and the Bloodskins attack each other, Harold carries out the final part of his plan. He shoots Rick and the leg, and then explains in excruciating detail why he's doing this to him. Harold then shoots Rick 4 times. As the crossed continue massacring each other, so does Harold continue massacring Rick. He then breaks Rick's jaw and shows him Claire's lips that he has been carrying with himself all this while. He reveals what he did to Claire and Darwin and says that he is now going to violate Rick because he won't be able to close his jaw. By dawn, Harold has carried out his plan to fruition. He walks through the massacred crossed in the basketball court like a messiah admiring his handiwork. And the icing on top of the cake for Harold is that he can now retrieve Laurie's backpack. The backpack is so precious to Harold because he keeps Laurie's cut-off breasts in it. Crossed Psychopath number 6, the flow of the viscous truth. The next part of the plan was tricky for Harold. He, Amanda and Rick had planned to rendezvous back at the farmhouse if everything went well, but everything hadn't. Harold had just killed Rick, and so he needed to make it look like that. In case something had gone wrong, they all had planned to rendezvous at a checkpoint 48 hours later. This was their plan B. And so while Amanda waited for them at the farmhouse, Harold had to wait outside. He watched her crying and praying for their survival, and he desperately wanted to go in and console her, but he couldn't. He wanted to do this right. And if he went inside right now, the entire plan would fall apart. And so reluctantly, Harold waited outside in the rain, but this gave him some much needed alone time, because he could once again indulge in his depraved fantasies. Laurie's breast that he carried was her entire being to him. For Harold, this piece of flesh was Laurie, and they had a lot of catching up to do. We then see the memory why Laurie had gone silent once she was rescued by Harold, because the first time he rescued her, they were hiding in the sewers, while the Crossed were rampaging on the ground above. Laurie was inconsolable after seeing her kids and husband die in front of her. Harold had calmed her down and put his arm around her, and for a moment Laurie had felt safe. She thanked Harold and told him that he was a good man, but that is when, under the pretext of being quiet, Harold took advantage of her. Laurie had gone into shock as she realized that she was trapped. Harold had taken advantage of her and used her body for his own pleasure while confessing his love for her. This is the reason Laurie had gone silent. She had simply lost her voice. She was nothing but a walking dead body, but Harold could never understand this. To him, this was her agreeing to his demands. And right now, Harold is holed up inside an abandoned house while he stares at Laurie's family picture. His brain has made him believe that he was Laurie's husband. He believes that the kids were also his and thinks that he had a happy life with Laurie, but in reality, all of this is in Harold's head. None of this ever happened. This is just the psychopath in him, making him believe lies. In another act of depravity, Harold begins to violate the piece of flesh that he thinks is Laurie. He begins to please himself, but when he puts his hand down his pants, he finds Claire's lips. This piece of flesh is again the entire being of Claire to him. He chucks it away and calls Claire a whore again. He then continues to pleasure himself with what he deems to be Laurie. While he is doing this, we see that Amanda has now left the farmhouse and is headed for the rendezvous point. After Harold has pleasured himself to his heart's extent, he reaches for his crutches, but that is when he makes a crucial mistake. He ends up knocking over the bedside lamp, and this attracts the attention of a nearby Crossed. Harold hides under the bed, but he already knows that it's too late for him. The Crossed man knows that there is a human hiding in the house, and he searches every nook and cranny for Harold. Even right now, Harold is deluded. He is blaming Claire for distracting him and for getting him caught. In a fit of rage, the Crossed flips over the mattress and ends up finding the piece of flesh that Harold calls Laurie. The Crossed is, of course, going to violate Laurie, but this is when Harold's desperation kicks in. He can't let this happen again. He can't watch Laurie get violated twice, and so he grabs the bedsheet and with his broken leg crawls towards his backpack. He uses the bedsheet to cover himself and then shoots the Crossed through the bedsheet as it tries to attack him. The plan works, and before the Crossed can fall on top of him, Harold quickly crawls away. He frantically checks his body for any wounds or blood. He finds some blood on one of his shoes and ends up quickly throwing it away. Now that his Laurie is safe, he decides to head to the rendezvous point. It takes him 33 hours to cover 4 miles with his broken leg, but once he reaches there, he finds Amanda already waiting for him. Amanda hugs Harold tightly as she is relieved that he has survived. She knows the absence of Rick means that he is dead, but she wants to savor this moment that at least someone is alive. While pretending to have a conversation with Amanda, all Harold can think about is all the ways in which he's going to violate her. Amanda wants to leave the place as soon as possible, but Harold assures her that there is no Crossed nearby. He says that they should stay here for a while because he has brought her dinner. Crossed Psychopath number 7, Survivors of the Dinner. Amanda and Harold sit in the diner and have a quiet dinner. Harold managed to procure some mooncakes on his way here, and they are currently the appetizers of their supposed date. Amanda does not think this is a date, but who can stop Harold from delving into his delusions? Amanda talks about her parents, and Harold pretends to be a good listener, but like with Claire, all he can think about is Amanda's body. Amanda slowly begins to cry when she continues to remember her parents, and Harold consoles her by saying that they shouldn't delve into their sorrows, at least not while they are having dinner. Once the two of them are done with the mooncakes, Harold pretends to go and prepare her a meal for the main course. Amanda thinks that Harold is going to cook something amazing for her, but all Harold is doing, back in the kitchen, is boiling the piece of flesh that he calls Laurie. He is cooking her breast so that he can feed it to Amanda. When Harold serves dinner and uncovers the dish he has made, Amanda recoils in horror, falls to her knees and then begins to vomit. Harold, under the pretext of helping her back to her feet, ends up tying her to the chair. When Amanda has recovered from her sudden shock, she begins screaming at the top of her lungs. This forces Harold to gag her, and he quickly ties a piece of cloth over her face. He then begins to talk to Amanda, who finally realizes that Harold is a psychopath. He is the one who killed all her friends. He is the one who killed Darwin. He lied about the mission and the Marines, and now he wants to feed a piece of Laurie to her in order to get her back. He thinks because Amanda is so pure and has no evil in her, the infected piece of flesh will simply inhibit her entire being. Harold thinks he is a genius. He thinks that he has figured the virus out. His theory is that once someone is infected, the virus simply blocks the good in them. This lets the evil in the person rule the entire body. But because he thinks Amanda is pure and totally good, without any evil in her, he believes that once she eats Laurie's flesh, her entire soul will be trapped by the virus, and all that will remain is Laurie. In her last moments, the infected Laurie had hurled abuses at Harold. She had called him an inadequate man and had proclaimed that she loved being violated by the crossed. But this mention of love is the only thing Harold has hung on to. He believes that in her last moments, Laurie had expressed her love for him. As he is telling this to Amanda, she is slowly starting to realize the delusions in which Harold has been living. When she sees the family picture that Harold pulls out of his backpack, all her suspicions are confirmed. The picture does not contain him. Once he has explained to Amanda what he is going to do, Harold removes the gag from her mouth. But by now, Amanda has figured out everything. She knows that she is going to have to play his game, beat him at his own delusions. She tells him that she is not who he thinks she is. She has a lot of evil inside her, and if he does this, he won't be able to get his supposed wife back. When Harold continues to force her, Amanda finally gives in and says, "I'll tell you what's going to happen if you do what you're going to do. When I turn into the crossed, I am going to rip your cock out of you, and then I am going to shove it down your throat. And while I am doing that, I will say things that will break your heart. They will break your delusions. Like the fact that Laurie never liked you. She never even loved you. I know that the man in the photograph is not you. He is a good-looking guy, someone I would happily have instead of you. I will never want you." And Amanda continues to break down Harold's delusions. She tells him that he was never able to satisfy Laurie, which is why, when she was violated using the garden tool by the crossed, she loved it. As all of these delusions break down for Harold, he begins to remember the way things actually happened, and this makes him angry. So angry that he ends up punching Amanda in the face. This breaks her nose, but she does not stop breaking down his delusions. And so, in a fit of rage, Harold pulls out the same gardening tool that was used on Laurie from his backpack and threatens to violate Amanda using it. But when he simultaneously remembers what happened to Laurie in her last moments, and what he is doing to Amanda right now, he begins to panic. Maybe Amanda is right, and Laurie was just another whore that didn't deserve his love. He bends down, apologizes to Amanda, and then begins to violate her. But Amanda by now has had enough time to try and break through her restraints. She buys more time by indulging in Harold and his fantasies. She agrees to go along with whatever he wants to do with her, but requests him to kiss her before they begin. But when Harold kisses her, she bites down on his lips forcefully and tears them off of his face. Blood spills everywhere as Amanda spits out his lips from her mouth. Harold, in a fit of rage, lunges at her with the gardening tool in his hands and slams her face into the ground. He begins to choke her and then raises his arm to bring down the gardening tool on her face. But Amanda is too desperate right now, and the force she has been applying on her restraints has been cutting through her flesh all this while, and once she gives it a final tug, she ends up amputating her right hand. But Amanda does not care. She is finally free. She uses the stump on her right arm to punch Harold directly in the face. She hits Harold so hard that he is momentarily knocked out, and this is exactly what Amanda needed. She quickly runs out of the diner and then escapes. She is gone, and Harold knows that he can't run after her, not with his broken leg, and so he decides to lick his wounds and live to fight another day. He knows that Amanda will survive because she is a fighter just like him. She will do whatever it takes to survive. Harold gets up, and so sews his lips back onto his face. He then picks up Amanda's amputated hand and then puts it in the same plastic bag that contains Laurie's breast. He then creates a makeshift weapon out of the gardening tool, but his psychopathic brain continues to serve him new delusions. As he looks out into the world and plans his new rampage, he says, "Maybe Amanda was right. Maybe I just need a common trollop with a curvy rear end and nice lips." The end marvelous verdict. In all of the crossed comics that we have covered so far, nothing comes close to Psychopath when it comes to depravity and gore. The art and story both are the stuff of nightmares. Harold Lorre is a crazy man and a true psychopath. He is depraved and will stop at nothing to fulfill his own desires. Other people, other animals, even the crossed, are simply tools for him to accomplish goals. And even though you would hate it, and most of us would never like to think about it, somewhere deep down, we know that men like this would exist if the crossed ever happened. If a virus like this ever broke out, the world would become the playground of such psychopaths. Overall, Crossed Psychopath is a harrowing read. Chills down your spine doesn't even begin to describe the feeling you get when reading through the entire story. Harold's thoughts are a lot more detailed and graphic in the actual comic. We had to tone things down a lot in order to make it palatable for everyone. All in all, if you've been reading the Crossed comics and are wondering how extreme things can get, then Crossed Psychopath is a great glimpse into the extremes of this universe.